Good morning, everybody. Tuesday morning, the 9th of June. Dean still thought it was March. It's not. It's June. We are here today with the leadership team of the Center for Leadership and Learning, thinking about how we rethink K-12 education. Here with Dr. Dean, Wilson, Todd, Shara, and Nancy. Nancy's going to run the show today because, of course, she's way more important than me and way more professional and really just all around better. So lucky for you, Nancy's in charge. Nancy, take it away and have fun.
All right. Thank you, Mark. So the title of our session is appropriately named Rethinking K-12 Education. As we know, this spring, school leaders and educators across the world have faced unprecedented and uncharted waters due to the pandemic. So the effect that has had in terms of creating a new reality for K-12 education and beyond is very real for all of us in the field of education. So our leadership charge now going forward is to do what we call in the military this active action review, or AAR as they call it in the military. That's where we're kind of just taking a deep breath and saying, what happened here? Like, we moved lightning fast to keep learning going for our kids and for our community. So this is the time for us to really kind of take some reflective review and talk about what happened. As we review what happened, what went well, what might have gone better, so that we can really best prepare for multiple scenarios that we may find ourselves in next year and beyond. So we have some incredibly knowledgeable and accomplished leaders who have been through this work right along with the rest of us and led this work so well to help us to prepare and think about some things that we need to be thinking about now as we prepare for the future. So I'd like to start off with introductions. I'll go in the order of my screen with Shara, Todd, and then Dean.
Good morning. I am Shara Johnson. I come to you from Nebraska. I work at the consortium level here in Nebraska, so we support districts within our area. I am a Canvas we call myself the Canvas Enthusiast. I just love the product. So I support Canvas for 14 of our schools. In addition, I'm a blend ed coach, and I'm also an instructor. So I teach education classes at our local academy.
Nice. I'm Todd Theobald. I'm based out of Salt Lake City. I'm a career-long educator. Most of my experience is elementary education, teacher, elementary school principal, and district level. And as a national distinguished principal, one of the things that I really focus on was using data to drive instruction, and really with high impact schools, and really turning around using that data. I now work part-time as an administrator in a large school district in Salt Lake City, and then the other half I go around and consult and work with teachers and districts and schools, trying to help them in their efforts to maximize learning by using data-driven practices.
Great. My name's Dean Wilson. I am a career educator, but I'm a born-again educator. I came into the field, I left and have since returned. So I'm excited to be back. In my roles in education, I've held the position of a middle school principal, a high school principal, an assistant superintendent of schools, and I'm currently the vice president of student services for a technical college here in rural Utah. So I bring the small school, rural schools perspective, and super excited to be with such a great team today.
Well, thank you all. Let's dive into it. So one of the things that I wanted to start us off talking about is, there were a lot of challenges we faced when we found ourselves needing to move and respond to stay-at-home orders across our nation and through the pandemic. And that created a lot of challenges, but there were a lot of silver linings that surfaced as we moved to this remote learning environment. I wonder if we could just begin talking about just 1 to 2 silver linings that either you personally experienced or that you heard others talking about that we can benefit from reviewing and reflecting on. Todd, can you start us off?
Yeah, it's funny. I think when everything's crazy, I think it's really important that we look for those silver linings. And so that's one thing. You look at this over the past couple of months, watching our teachers, the instant shock of so many of our teachers who really had no experience. Our district did not have a learning management system, a platform that we were required to use or that all teachers were using. And so that moment of shock and kind of, I hate using the word chaos, but a little bit of, we had 2 days to establish some sort of learning system. So we came in on a Monday trying to figure out what we were doing, and instruction was to begin on Wednesday. And so just watching my teachers grow, and that first moment, like, we have no idea what we're doing. How are we going to do all this? And all of just that negative self-talk, to now we just wrapped up our instruction. Last Friday was our last official day of school. And to watch our teachers not only embrace so many elements of it, but start getting excited about how all of those things that they did while they were doing it from a distance, so many of those pieces they can incorporate into their everyday, and they're just excited about that. So that's been a really fun thing to watch, is even though this has not been ideal, to watch my teachers grow in their confidence and ability to provide instruction even when their kids are not just right in front of them.
Yeah, I think that's really exciting to really highlight, Todd, just that teachers stepped up and did such great things, and things that I think they never even realized they were capable of. So great silver linings. Shara, what were some things that you discovered as silver linings during this whole pandemic?
So I'm kind of with Todd a little bit. I'm going to go into that, but I was thinking 2 key words, like relationships and conversations. The first thing that really I felt like that really didn't surprise me, but kind of like affirmed my belief in humanity, was that we were worried about people. We were worried that people had their basic needs. We were worried that kids felt connected, that we were getting kids fed. I thought the humanity that came out in our small communities, and I live in rural Nebraska. So we had restaurants that were opening their doors to kids to feed them breakfast and lunch. And we had schools that were making sure kids got all what they needed. We live in a small town, so we had teacher parades where the teachers made these, they really mapped it all out. So they were able to drive by all the kids. And we had our main streets of our local communities here. If you drive down our main streets, there was banners of every senior who's graduating. So it's really been a cool people experience and relationship building, because people have really reached out to do maybe what they wouldn't do before and go above and beyond. And then to circle back to what Todd said, the conversations we're having right now is a silver lining for me, because these conversations weren't happening before. And because of what we've experienced, like Todd had mentioned, the conversations I'm having with teachers and districts to do things maybe they didn't think they could do before, but now they see a need, is really, really empowering, and it's super exciting in the work that we're doing. And I think that even if we are in person or we're remote, the things that we're talking about would benefit kids no matter what situation we're in. So that's the part that I get excited about. And I think that's a silver lining from this whole thing, is we're going back to the why are we doing what we're doing? Why is this important? And how does this best meet the needs of our kids? So it's been exciting to have those conversations.
I love how you focused on the why, the humanity of it, and just how important it is during times like this for the community to come together. And it's a great opportunity for schools to truly be the heart and soul of a community that keeps us united and working toward the best interest of everybody who's trying to raise their kids and families in the community. So thank you for sharing that. Dean, how about you? You are further along in this process by virtue of closing down a community college and now beginning to open back up. So I'm sure you have some great insights on silver linings.
For me, the biggest gift that has come through this is the gift of perspective, not only for our adults, but also our students. As I look at our teams and I look at the work that's happened in and around our communities, really what this event has done is it's forced interdependence. Whether we like it or not, we're all in this together. And the collaborative approach that I've seen educators authentically crave and work towards has been something that has been unique, and I think has been uniquely personal for educators. They're learning things for the first time right alongside with their students. And I think oftentimes in education, we would tend to get comfortable, or we tend to get in a routine. And this has forced everyone to reevaluate the effectiveness of the things that we do. And so that ability to be introspective and have a good outcome come from that, that is one of the biggest blessings I think that this has brought to not just our community, but multiple communities.
I love what you said about that. And I think that that's a common reality that many of us as educational leaders face, is that, leaders or teachers quite often don't like to be on the edge of their comfort zone. And yet we're asking kids to do that every single day. So I think that's been an incredible silver lining for all of us to kind of be there together and realize that we can get through it together. So thank you for doing that. So my next question is still sort of focused on that after action research. So it's, while we understand there's much to be gained about leveraging those bright spots and that capacity that maybe we never knew or realized that we had, it's also, of course, good to reflect on the unexpected challenges that we face, the roadblocks or barriers that we didn't see coming or hadn't really fully anticipated. So can each of you respond to some of those challenges that you faced and had to move through or know are still glaring in front of us as we plan moving forward? Sharon, I know you've got some good perspectives because you work with so many districts across Nebraska and helping a lot of folks to navigate through some of those unexpected challenges.
Yeah, so I'm kind of the remote learning blend ed coach. So when this all happened, we were kind of really seeking guidance and a direction. I think all of us were. And a lot of our administrators, are taking care of those issues like, how am I paying my staff? And how are we going to handle special education students? And how do we proceed with IEPs? And there were so many questions, and I think we were all just looking for direction, and we weren't really quite sure to handle all those things. And I know I was hanging on every word that our legal counsel was giving us. I would attend all the webinars. I was, taking notes, and because we want to make sure we did it right. But in that time, I feel like we kind of forgot the instruction piece a little bit. We were so concerned about other pieces. And now I feel like that's kind of like been a blessing for us as we start the fall, because we're starting to have those conversations now that we know all those things, right? We know how we're going to pay people. We know what special education looks like in this remote space. We have all those things kind of in place, and we know what that requires. Now we can talk about how do we leverage good instruction and the tools that we have to, like I said before, either be in this remote space or not, but do what's best for kids. So that was one of the things. The other thing that was kind of a challenge for us here is that not all of our schools are one-to-one. And so there was that technology equity issue. Not everybody had remote, connection, Wi-Fi. So trying to manage either paper pencil options, I know we use the words packets, but trying to manage that and manage, online for other students. And we were just kind of thrust into it, maybe without the prior proper planning, which is now the summertime is so important because we're trying to figure out how that system works come the fall. So those are some of the challenges that we've had. That direction piece was really huge. And I feel now that we have those established, it gives us a great springboard for what do we do next. Yeah. But yeah.
And I know you mentioned staying focused on the why, and I think that that's a really great reflection, is making sure that as we go into the fall, we don't allow those logistical things that have to be tight and we have to be, really clear on, get in the way of our immediate focus, which is strong and continuous learning. And certainly the whole equity issue, I think, we all face the same challenges and know that we're going to need to solve for that. Mm-hmm. So Dean, how about you?
You took the word right out of my mouth. It's equity for both the leader and the learner in this. I think as we take a look back with our after action responses, we look at what worked and what didn't. We have to be really honest. We have to be really honest of what levels of support were in place prior to this for our educators. And then moving forward, what levels of support do we need to provide to ensure that we can execute learning at a high level, regardless of the setting that we find ourselves in. Another great silver lining for me is really the human aspect of this, to where, we're all connecting virtually. Todd's in his kitchen, Shara's in her office space, Nancy's in a great little sitting room, and I'm in an office. What if I'm a student that is comes from poverty? What if I'm a student that has a house that they don't necessarily even feel comfortable showing or sharing? And what have we done to ensure that those students can connect? I look back at some of the great things we've done, whether it's been virtual graduations or drive-through graduations. I think one of the things that we're dissecting afterwards is, what did we do for those students that couldn't get a car to drive in the parade? What are we doing to make sure that those students that, have multiple siblings didn't just become a primary caregiver, and that their learning took precedence over anything else? Because we still have that unique ability to teach and reach every student should we want to. And so I think moving forward, as we make decisions, we're going to make better decisions, because issues like equity and inequality are two things that we cannot and will not ignore as we move forward.
And I think, you're so, on target with we have to focus on the whole child, and in order to solve for some of these equity issues, and, just critical and some really deep thinking around our most vulnerable students will help us to hopefully make good, sound decisions that educate the whole child even better than we've ever done before. Great insights. Todd, how about you? What unexpected challenges did you guys face?
So I was just thinking about all the things that you guys have said. And, at the very beginning, Nancy, you talked about this after action review. And looking at the four of us, we are in a very unique situation because of the work that we do with the Center for Leadership and Learning. We, throughout all of this, have been connected to schools and districts all across the country, and leaders experiencing different challenges in very different ways, whether they're large, humongous school districts or very small rural districts. And I just want to kind of give a plug for, that is the power of the Center for Leadership and Learning, is doing this work and connecting people so that we don't just learn from our own mistakes and our own challenges, but the series that we're starting up in July really helps connect people so that they can experience all of this together and realize that it's not always so unique, that we have some similar challenges. One of the first biggest things that I know we will address in our leadership series for our school was, initially, to make it easier for teachers, we wanted to give everyone autonomy. So use whatever platform you want in whatever way. And we thought we were being so generous to our teachers by allowing that, and thinking if the teacher does it, what makes it comfortable for them, then it's going to be so great for kids and families. And what we found, talking about a challenge, was parents that are trying to support kids, whether they're multiple grades in elementary or from elementary, middle, and high school, same district, using multiple platforms. Even within the platform, it looks different. Where do I find my assignments on this kid's Canvas or on this kid's Google versus somebody else? And it really became a massive challenge for our families. And it added to that frustration where we didn't need to add any frustration to families. And so that was a unique thing. And looking at the work, especially, I've really leaned on Shara's expertise with this, and the work that she's done to kind of standardize that across the district, and multiple districts she works with. And I think that is the power of all of this, is that we've all gone through something together, even though it's been very unique and different, but bringing leaders together, that's why I'm just so grateful for this platform and for this work that we do with the Center for Leadership and Learning, and specifically that series that's coming up starting in July, so that we can learn from everybody else's after action review and figure out if there are things that we didn't think of.
Yeah, and thank you for lifting that up, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more at the end. But for anybody who's listening and participating, we do have an exciting series that we think is going to be exactly what school leaders and district leaders need right now to help them to have a broad lens of expertise and things that other schools are trying and thinking about, to help us all to be connected and collaborative and hopefully make the best choices for ourselves and our community. So we're looking forward to being able to offer that 4-part leadership series coming up beginning in July. But let's keep with that train of thought that you mentioned, Todd, about just that whole concept that we've heard, during times like these, keep it simple, stupid, right? Like that old acronym, and I think we underestimated how important that was, as families were trying to manage, now being their children's learning coaches, managing a household, working either from home or, going into work still. And I know that in Charlotte, we heard loud and clear from parents that it was really important that we learn effective ways to streamline and keep things as simple, as concise as possible. So I'll kick it to Shara first. What are some ways that you feel like are really critically important that we ought to consider around streamlining things for our families in order to keep this healthy balance?
Yeah, so Todd segued this perfectly. Thank you, Todd. That's exactly how we experienced it in our district. So I mentioned I work with 14 districts that use Canvas, but there are people that are outside of my districts that reach out as well, and they all were experiencing the same thing. And let's be honest, if a district's using Canvas, it doesn't mean that everybody's using Canvas. I mean, there are teachers who use Google, there are teachers that are using Seesaw, and what Todd mentioned is exactly what happened. In fact, one of my very best friends has 3 kids in a district close by. And she just said to me, she goes, Shara, she goes, I'm getting text messages, I'm getting emails, I'm getting phone calls. And she goes, it's every single day for every teacher. And while she was trying to do a really good job at the beginning of educating her kids at home, and she just found that it was too much. And she had to really like step away and say, what can we do? We're going to do the best we can. But she couldn't keep up with all the communication. So one of the things I'm really working with my districts about is I don't want to say standardization, because that's not it. But we need to like kind of maintain the same platform. And whether your platform is that you're going to use Google Suite and you're going to have one point of entry, that's great. I'm a Canvas person, so everything should stem from Canvas for me. And my schools are realizing, even though we didn't do it prior, Canvas should be the communication hub. It should be how you're messaging families, whether it's parents, kids, teachers. It doesn't matter. If you're talking about PLC initiatives in your district with your teachers, use Canvas. If you're talking about reaching kids in classrooms, use Canvas. If you're talking about reaching parents, use Canvas. It's one point of entry. But what we do in that, so we have like, for example, lower elementary teachers who are using Seesaw. That's great. We're going to use Canvas though for that one point of entry. We're going to use a tool within Canvas to integrate Seesaw so that everything is in one space for kids. And just that one point of entry, I keep saying that, but I just like, it's really important that parents have one place to go, regardless if they have a 1st grader, a 6th grader, and an 8th grader. They all can start and stem from one place. The other thing, and I'm the technology person, so one of the things that happened when this whole, the pandemic came out is, and you probably saw it on Facebook, people were sharing like lists of 200 teaching tools to make your classroom more engaging. And I mean, we're talking like lists. There were like hundreds of tools that are being shared. And we really talked to our teachers about use the things that are tried and true. They're things your kids are already comfortable with, right? We don't want to introduce all of these new tools, although there's some that are really great. But as you said, keep it simple and use the things that are tried and true, the things that we already support, maybe introduce a few, but let's not like introduce 40 new tools for every classroom, because that just reduces, it actually increases anxiety and just kind of muddles it a little bit. So sorry, I got really excited. But so I love Canvas. So like I said before, the conversations I'm having right now with teachers are awesome, with districts are awesome. They want to make it better for kids. They want to make it better for parents. And I'm just excited I get to be a part of it.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know that we found that a lot, in our district as well, as many people were using different platforms, but pleased we're a Canvas district as well. In fact, our state is, but we're pleased to see that many of the things they were using could actually fit inside Canvas. So there is just one single sign-on experience for families. And that's a great strategy for keeping things simple and manageable for families as well as for educators. Dean, what were some things that you knew were really important in terms of streamlining to make things manageable for your stakeholders?
I think it comes back down to, along with equity comes access. And as I think of how did we make not only content accessible, authentic assessment accessible, the relationships between students and instructors, how did we continue to make those relationships available? Really, I don't think we can answer that yet in terms of did we do a great job or did we, miss the mark? But I do think that we have some tools that we've developed around this to help not just our situation, but all situations. I want to go to Jerem Shannon's comment about, what are we doing to kind of address not only the poverty gap, but how do we make things more accessible? How do we make educators and students get better access? And I think it comes back to answering the fundamental 5. What am I supposed to do? When is it due? How did I do? Can you help me? What more can I do? I think if we keep those 5 questions in our head and then reference, how does this look to a student that has high levels of support? How does this look to a student that has a mid-level of support? And what does this look like for students that have low-level supports? So long as we can answer those 5 questions within each of those subgroups, I think that's a best first step in getting to the point of equity, is getting that access point. If they understand, if I can go to Canvas, this is where I can answer these 5 questions, and through authentic assessment, through my interaction with my teacher and instructor, through my feedback. I think that's the one thing that we can't lose, is the power of feedback through all of this, keeping those relationships open to the point where, you know, a student can reach out and say, I want to be a part, I want to engage, I can't because, then we can start to really make learning personal to that student. And so for me, that it comes back to the fundamental 5, and really how do we address that for all students, depending upon the level of support that they have.
Yeah. Thank you for addressing that so well, Dean. Just great insights. And I think, you know, basically understanding that there can't be just one, where the streamline and consistency is important. We also have to balance that with, we understand the reality is that there can't be just one solution to kids getting access and connectivity and being able to keep their learning going. It has to be adaptive, and we have to find ways to make it work for all of our families so that we don't broaden equity gaps and opportunity gaps, you know, in the process. So excellent response to that question. Thank you. And an important question that we know many of us are grappling with across the nation. So as we begin this planning for summer and the multiple scenarios, I know many of us have talked about there, you know, just depending on where you live and where things are in terms of recovery from the pandemic. Many of us are planning for multiple scenarios that include a hybrid model, a social distancing model, return to school, or starting fall still in a remote learning, and knowing that next year may include some combination of all of those things going forward. So this whole idea of taking practices and processes that we had down and solid in a school level building and rethinking those so that they can become portable no matter what kind of environment we find ourselves in, seems to be really important, so that it enables us to remain agile and adaptive regardless of the scenario that we find in. So I'm curious if you guys have some sort of big bucket areas in terms of systems and structures for how you do business in schools that you feel really need to be a focus, so that those systems and structures function equally well, regardless of the scenario that you've envisioned. Dean, can you start us off by helping us think about some big bucket areas?
Absolutely. I think as we look at big bucket areas, what does quality feedback look like in a virtual setting? Students are only as responsive as the feedback we provide. The same thing with parents. Along with that, what feedback are we as ed leaders providing to our instructors in terms of what does quality online engagement look like? What does quality online assessment look like? We have to define and then teach what best practice is in this new era. And so for me, as I look at, you know, what are those big bucket items, it really comes back to getting the right feedback at the right time for the right purpose. If we can do that and do that well, it doesn't matter where we're at, we're going to meet the needs of our students. And so really dialing in that feedback piece, I think is critical for all districts.
That's excellent. And there are lots of effective ways to do that in person or virtually. And I think that's another silver lining that you accentuate, is that I think many of us realized when it comes to student engagement, which is a hot buzzword that we're all seeking to maximize, that feedback is a critical element in keeping kids engaged and feeling like we're understanding and seeing them as learners and helping them to continue to grow. So Todd, how about you? What are some big bucket areas for portable structures?
Yeah, so I want to piggyback off of what Dean said. You know, providing feedback is really hard, and it has to be really focused. So one of the things that we're really looking at, and, you know, we've heard all sorts of things that we've missed. You know, we've lost 25% of a school year, a typical school year. So how do we make up 125% of next year? And one of the biggest pieces that we're working on, and it's a lot of the work that I do, is looking at standards. So going through your core and identifying those that are truly power standards. And the way that we identify power standards is it's those things that teachers are willing or feel necessary to constantly, consistently, and relentlessly monitor progress. And with that monitoring, then that's what we provide that feedback on. It goes under the idea of if everything is important, then nothing is. When we spread ourselves too thin, we don't do anything super well. And I think that's something, whether we are in a remote learning or a blended, or if we find ourselves suddenly, in the classroom and then back out for a couple of weeks, depending on what happens, knowing what our focus is. So doing that work, being able to identify those standards, communicate that very, very well to our students and families. That feedback allows them to pinpoint their own level of understanding relative to those core standards so that they can focus and feel like they're getting something out of this. I think that's one of the overall kind of, not complaints, but frustrations for parents, was that they want to be good teachers to their kids at home, and they don't know if their kids are learning. And that's one thing, that identifying those power standards and creating a mastery learning scale that allows parents to see how kids progress through that standard helps them know, okay, this is where my kid's at. Here's that overall goal. And I'm just going to incrementally work to build their skills so they can get there. And then people feel like this whole schooling situation at home or wherever was successful. So that is one of our biggest areas of focus, is identifying what are those big key pieces, whether you call them power standards, priority standards, focus standards, and then really working your way through so that everybody learns, everybody moves, everybody improves.
I love what you said about just really being intentional and taking time to think through so that we keep this learning manageable, and the whole idea of learning continuums and progressions, and the thought of, finding ways that we can keep that forward facing for our families, for our kids, and for our teachers. There's no need for that to be a secret that the teacher only holds like close to their chest. It helps everybody to be able to see those things and see what we're working towards. So Shara, how about you? What are your thoughts on things that we really need to think critically about?
So we're talking about making things portable. It kind of piggybacks off what Dean and Todd were talking about, but we want to make sure that the work the teachers are doing is valued and that they have the space they need to collaborate. So again, using the systems we already have in place, I speak of Canvas, but our PLCs, we're really working on that here in our local areas about, identifying those essential standards as a PLC or maybe a grade level group, and then looking at the work that students are doing and adjusting instruction based on that work. And so how do we make those systems portable? How do we let our grade level teams meet during the week, maybe if we're remote? How do we put those structures in place so that we can support that work? And that can be done in a remote setting using tools that we're already using with our students. So as administrators, I encourage them to model the use of whatever system it is that you're using. We're talking about Canvas because that's what we use here, but you model whatever system you're using and use that with your teachers to support the work that they're doing in classrooms, because it's a powerful tool for us as adults and adult learners, just like it is for students. So to support that work that they're doing in the classroom, I think is a great way to start thinking about how we're going to continue to support teachers as well.
Thank you, Sharon. I love what you said about the leaders modeling some of that consistency and making that leap. And sometimes that's difficult for us to do, but it also puts us at that place of just learning and creating and being vulnerable right with the teachers and students. And so I just think the importance of that, and leaders not being afraid to model that, is just so critically important. So guys, I want to turn our attention just a little bit to the reality that we found ourselves in when what we thought might be a few weeks turned into months of, a shifting ambiguity of current realities, and whether we were going to take grades or stay in review mode or new learning. And I don't know about you guys, but I know that, here in Charlotte, over time, it began to take its toll, and we saw, leaders really struggling to keep teachers, and teachers struggling sometimes to keep kids motivated and engaged and taking care of each other. And so it seems like that's something that is another critical piece of this equation as we begin to think about what we need to pay attention to as we plan forward. Can you guys share some successful practices that you saw or that you were engaged in that you really felt were things that might be replicated going forward that really did help keep engagement high and help create systems where we were really just taking care of each other and our social and emotional needs? Shara, do you want to start off?
Yeah, sure. So so I teach teachers as well. And so we always talk about self-care in my classroom. Before the pandemic hit, we talked about self-care, and we're talking about it still. In fact, a plug for the Nebraska Teacher of the Year. She did a TED Talk on self-care last year. So it worked perfectly into my year this year with my teachers. So when we left, we still talked about self-care, and I encourage my kids to do things to take care of themselves, take care of others, make sure that they, attitude of gratitude, all of that. But just a plug for one of my favorite authors, and she's a speaker too. Actually, I have her book right here. But Catlin Tucker, who's a blend ed coach, she did something really cool in her district that I thought was neat, and it not necessarily on engagement, but social emotional learning and self-care. She did well-being boards, and she did it in her district. So they did one for lower elementary, they did one for high school, and they did one for teachers because it's important. And they challenged each other to use these well-being boards, and they used them in their classrooms, but also on social media, to tag, but it encouraged them to take care of themselves. And there was stuff like, movement and escape with a book and do something kind for someone else. Just thinking off the top of my head, but it was a choice board essentially. And they encourage students to participate and parents to participate and the teachers to participate. And so we're trying to take care of not only engaging students in classroom activity, but we also want to make sure that they're moving and that they're taking care of their mental health. So I thought that was really neat. And you use some of your social platforms to maybe have kids tag themselves doing things or whatever. But I liked her approach, and I thought it was a good one, and it kind of tied into what I was doing. So that's just an example of something that was done this spring.
I love that concept of a well-being board. That's awesome. I'm totally going to steal that idea. Todd, how about you? What were some things that you saw or participated in that you felt like helped with the well-being and motivation stuff that was critically important?
So I think one of the first things is just that face-to-face, even though obviously it's not in person, how powerful it was as our teachers began doing some live sessions. And I know that's pretty common. A lot of schools initially were not doing these live sessions because many teachers were overwhelmed by it or afraid of how they would look on screen or whatever. But as they started doing those whole group ones, that was the first thing. The kids at least got to see their other classmates and things. But then as teachers became more and more comfortable, they started using tools such as like breakout rooms. And for those that aren't familiar with that, whether you're using Zoom or some other platforms, that being able to assign students into small groups and then putting those kids out into small groups so they could collaborate, and the teacher can kind of pop in and out of those groups. And that suddenly allowed for kids to talk to each other, because what our teachers found was having all of those faces on the screen and having kids talk, they were just constantly muting everybody. And so allowing them to be, 3 or 4 of these small groups. So that was really good for the engagement piece, but it was also really good for some strategic instruction so that the teachers can put those kids into levels groups and have conversations and give good feedback, but get good responses and really know if kids were learning or what they were doing. And then with some of those tools, they automatically bring the class back together at a certain time that you set. So those were some really cool things to watch our teachers. Now, not everybody did that, but all of those tools are available. And that's something that I'm really excited as we've done our after action review. It's like, that's some learning that needs to happen now that teachers are comfortable. They need to learn some of those extra tools that are already within the platform that we're using. So I'm excited by that, and I thought it was really good for kids.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that a lot of teachers definitely learned how important it was and how much kids really look forward to that face-to-face and that personal connection, even in a virtual environment, as a key way to keep kids motivated and coming back each day and each week. Dean, what were some great strategies that you and your teacher leaders used to keep kids motivated and help that take care of each other?
Well, I think internally we moved away from focusing on, what could be considered a lag indicator and really focusing on leading indicators. So in reference to weight loss, if I'm always focused on losing weight, I'm never focused on the effective habits that lead to weight loss. And so as we looked at the new environment and the new field that we found ourselves playing on, we couldn't necessarily just focus on growing or increasing student achievement. We had to really focus on those finite behaviors that oftentimes get overlooked, like, do I have a protocol in place for providing feedback to students? Do I have a mechanism in which I am going to solicit feedback if I'm unable to contact that student? Really getting down to the root cause of, if my intent is to help students achieve at high levels, how do I meet their social and emotional needs? And am I tracking the frequency in which I'm doing that? We started to track things and look at things that we typically may have taken for granted in the past, because out of necessity, we can't ever do that moving forward. And so I think the frequency and quality of feedback that we're providing to students and the number of interactions is definitely there. One resource that I promote throughout every type of consulting I've ever done is something called Search Research's 40 developmental assets. Those are 40 age-appropriate assets that take a community-based approach to build within students so they can have healthy relationships. Focusing on those 40 assets and what we can do to develop those as a community is another great way to help ensure that social emotional aspect.
Great. And I think, you make a great point of just how intertwined, what we're trying to do for kids instructionally in terms of giving them quality feedback is to social emotional well-being and this growth mindset that really does keep kids engaged and feeling like, somebody's helping them to identify what they're good at and what they know a lot about, and helping to make learning personal and meaningful, and how important that is. So we look forward to hearing about that asset-based resource, and hopefully in your first of the 4 leadership sessions. So as we talk about this whole concept of the title of this was Re-envisioning, Reimagining K-12 Education and Beyond. And something that I want us to really think about is, there's some things that we've done forever and ever in education just because we've always done them. And I wonder if you guys have some thoughts around something that we've done forever that maybe it's time to let go of because it's not serving our kids well, and not as modern day in terms of preparing kids for college and career readiness. Dean, you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I think that the biggest thing that I don't want to see leave is the idea that we need to think of school years in terms of first grade, second grade, third grade. This is K-12. We have 12 years to get these students to the finish line, and that growth mindset and the ability to really, I don't care if I've got to go above level, below level to ensure this student acquires this skill. That mindset, that thought track is exactly what I want to see moving forward. I don't care about point acquisition. I care about skill acquisition. I don't care when you learn it. I care that you learn it. And those are some of the biggest things that I hope never go away, that have really been brought to the forefront through this process.
Awesome. And that is just such a helpful reminder. Those grade barriers and the parameters we put around what's supposed to be learned in a year are really things that we as educators put on there that sort of prevent us from viewing K-12 education as a continuous learning. And I think that we help our kids and our teachers when we keep that mindset, and hopefully we'll preserve that. Todd, how about you?
So to piggyback off of that, I think reporting out to parents. At the end of the year, our teachers were in there's so much confusion about what are these report cards supposed to look like. Our state gave the direction that, students were supposed to have the same score they had from their third quarter, unless you had evidence to show that they had made improvements, but we weren't supposed to be giving them a lower score. And so I think piggybacking off of that is just change the way we report out to parents. And that's a conversation we had a lot with our school, was that the whole purpose of a report card is just to communicate how your students are doing relative to these standards. And so that is something I think that now that we've had kind of a break in that, of the old traditional how we report everything based on points and stuff, now it's really about just communicating learning to families. So whatever that looks like, whether it's standards-based grading or whatever, I think this is an opportunity we can change the way parents and families and students and teachers look at what those little grades represent.
So insightful and just so true. And again, just a great thing that we now understand that hopefully we can use to reframe. Shara, how about you?
There's a couple things that come to mind, but I think about a lot of the blend ed practices that some of our teachers are employing right now. That's really giving students agency. Like they're having some control over the pace in which they move. They're having control over maybe when they learn. If anybody knows me, my best work time is from 10 at night to 1 in the morning. I mean, me as a professional, that is when I do my best work. My husband hates it, but that's just how I operate. And unfortunately, my son's just like me. So for him to take calculus at 8 a.m., that is not always his best learning time. So this remote time, I think people have realized that kids are having some choice of how they move through content. And maybe if they control the pace and they can rewind and they can watch again, or, they can choose. And I also love that we have a lot of teachers that are dabbling in some blended practices like choice boards and playlists, and kids are getting to choose how they show what they know. Maybe it's not like a multiple choice test, but they're creating something that allows them to show what they know. And so we've had some teachers, dabbling in this, and I hope that continues. Because I think that that's important. One of the things when we started, I had a school that I was working with. I said, if you can, I know it's a big ask, but if you could get a week's worth of plan up at a time, like on Sunday, Saturday, whatever, if you could get a week for the kids so that they could move through the content in the way that they can move through it, that would be really life-changing for some kids, because some kids will be watching kids during the day, or they have to work, or they have to move through it when they can. And so just having some of those, thoughts. The other thing that we talked about yesterday, we were in a meeting and we were talking about, do we put psychology online or do we have it in class? There are some things that I think we're learning can live in an online space, and that maybe not every class needs to be 50 minutes, and that, forcing the hand of that traditional bell schedule. And maybe we think about that a little differently, like, does a chemistry class need to be the same length as a pottery class? I don't know, maybe it does. But we have operated within that traditional schedule, and I now know that sometimes we're forcing that issue. And I'd love to have more conversations about that, about, how could we change that, modify that to do what's best for kids. So lots of good conversations taking place.
Truly great conversations and great considerations around things that we've just never questioned, that maybe now's the time when we've got enough open-mindedness and a need that we can actually drive and improve some of those things and do them even better. So thank you all for your great insights. That seems to be probably a good place for us to land in terms of our final question. This has just been a great and engaging conversation, one that I hope our guests have found valuable and insightful. I hope it's raised some thoughts, some questions, some action items for you. This is hard work that we're embarking upon, and it's work that none of us needs to do alone. So I want to just take this opportunity to circle back around to share an exciting experience that we're going to be offering at the Center for Leadership and Learning. And that will be a group with these same, all four of us. We're going to be doing a 4-part virtual learning and leadership series that will help guide you and prepare you to go deeper into these questions, to plan forward for the multiple scenarios that you might find yourself in. So I'm going to give Dean Wilson, who is going to be leading that first session, which will tee off in early July, a few minutes to just share with the participants a little bit about what that focus of the first session will be and what participants can hope to walk away with.
Well, first of all, we're going to harness the collective efficacy of every single educator that logs into this. And so it's a highly collaborative, highly communicative experience. So it's not a sit and get, it's a really melding of the minds. And I want to make sure that people understand that it is going to be a collaborative experience. With that, we want to talk about how do we intend to re-envision our schools, and we really want to make sure that we keep that focus on social and emotional learning, or how do we ensure that we're educating the whole child. We want to create an adaptive culture in a multimodal environment. If you look at the studies that are just coming out about the effectiveness of distance ed, those schools and districts that had identified as having a flexible culture or a culture that was adaptive to change were really the districts that were able to do the best job at distance learning. So we're going to be talking about some of those highlights. We're also going to talk about what is a priority. You know, if I were to ask you, is your arm a priority? You might say, yeah, I need my arm. If I ask it in reference to your heart and your arm might take a different priority if I had to take your heart. And so how do we as ed leaders go through and prioritize what we are going to focus on as we move forward? We're going to talk about the fundamental 5 in depth. I briefly mentioned that earlier, but that's really, if we can answer those 5 questions in relation to student learning, we're creating an opportunity for access and equity right out of the gate. So that's going to be a big focus. And really lastly is how do we create systems that can streamline communication, that can help elevate the level of collaboration that we have, whether it's in a face-to-face or in a portable setting. So it's going to be an amazing series. I am thrilled to engage and interact with all of you that are going to be attending this. But really, it's going to be the first step of a multifaceted plan so that as we re-enter school, we enter with a plan. We are ready to roll on day 1.
Thank you, Dean. So we are here to support you, to be your thought partners, to help to create a collaborative environment across our great nation, to help everybody to plan well for the future. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Shara, Todd, and Dean, for sharing your incredible insights and wisdom and expertise. It helps us all to get better and to prepare well.
Thank you, Nancy, for leading. Appreciate it.